just so thank you everyone, and welcome to Breaking into Tech, Ace Your Interview. We are very excited to have you all here with us today, and we're very excited to be here, and it's Thursday and we're all alive, and that's pretty good. So welcome to Breaking into Tech, Ace Your Interview. This is part 2 of a 3-part series. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Naomi Demsas. I am on the leadership team of the Eritrean Diaspora Network. Nami Russom, who is HR and business partner at Google, right?
HR business partner.
HR business partner. She's an HR business partner at Google, and she has been graciously moderating and facilitating these workshops for us, and she's going to introduce herself in a few minutes. But before we get started, for those of you new to the Eritrean Diaspora Network, EDIN is a community organization dedicated to the advancement of the Eritrean diaspora through nonpartisan community programming. One of the ways that we do that is through professional development. EDIN has a professional development network, and the primary objective of this program is to promote the spirit of networking and cooperation among Eritreans in the diaspora and help foster their individual and collective success by providing networking opportunities, supporting the development of Eritreans in their given careers through various programming efforts like this one. We are enhancing the awareness of the professional accomplishments of Eritreans within both the Eritrean, to the Eritrean diaspora and to the larger community that we live in. Hence, we have a monthly professional spotlight. Nami was one of our spotlight. To date, we've featured about 84 Eritreans in a wide variety of careers. And then we've also hosted over 22 workshops on various topics, including finance, immigration, and grad school, to name a few. Last but not least, we have a couple housekeeping items. Please keep in mind the mission and values of our organization and respect this space. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, but if you feel free as we go through to add them to the comment box. We'll do our best to track them. Raise your hands. You're more than welcome to ask questions live. And then additionally, you could use the Q&A feature on Zoom. It's right on it's on the bottom toolbar here. If you take pictures and talk about this awesome event and you're so excited to be here and Nami's gonna kill it, please tag us at Eri Diaspora. It's ERI Diaspora. And last but not least, we want you guys to have fun, make use of this time and space. So with that said, let's just jump into the workshop. I'm gonna let Nami take it away. Go ahead, Nami.
Thank you. Well, let me do a quick introduction, and I'm not going to read my entire bio, but I grew up in Colorado. That's where I am now, hanging out with mom and renovating her house. I started my career at IBM doing management consulting and SAP consulting for 3 years. I traveled globally, and I was a road warrior for a really long time until I realized I had no friends and no life, and I needed to figure out something new. And honestly, genuinely just realized part of what I loved about consulting was being a professional problem solver, learning more about what organizations are doing, getting to sort of be on the inside of their business. What I didn't enjoy doing was the technical components of the job. And so most of the steam that I got, or the energy that I got from my roles, was helping our partners typically figure out how they were going to staff the team, how organizations were going to run after this new system went live. And that was part of when I started thinking about how I wanted to spend more of my time doing the things that actually brought me energy. And for me, it was thinking a lot about business from the people angle and less of the revenue or the technical or the infrastructure component. And so I left IBM after 3 years post-college and went and joined Teach for America. I thought I should work for the nonprofit space for a number of different reasons, and did compensation there, spent 8 years there. And by the time I left, I was leading their total rewards program. And I loved that for so many different reasons. And I can talk to you all about that at another point. and did that for 8 years until I realized I actually really enjoyed coaching executives on their people strategy and figuring out how to mobilize people aligned to business goals and objectives. And so that's part of why I went for the HR business partner role, because that's basically what we do all day. And I also wanted to go back into tech and sort of work for an organization I thought was thinking about people in a more innovative way. And that's why I specifically chose the tech space, because I do think they think about people more comprehensively than I think HR does as an industry. So that's a little bit about my story and my career. I would say one of the things that's really important to me when I do these, and if you all were here during the last session, you know, I'm a very informal presenter. I don't like to hear my voice the entire time. So you'll hear Naomi and I going back and forth, but also please drop stuff in the chat if you have questions as we're going along, so that we can make sure that we're making the best use of this time for you all. I know you guys are dedicating time out of your evenings to join us, so we really appreciate you, but I want to make sure you get what you want out of this time. Okay. I love to start with some of the basics on acing your interview. So let me talk about the agenda, what I want to do. So I've already covered an introduction, but I want to talk about some of the best practices to acing your interview. Do's and don'ts. I interview all the time, all day, every day, mostly executives, but I find that people sometimes do the best job telling their story, and sometimes some of the most talented people do the worst job of telling their story. So I want to talk to you all about those do's and don'ts. And we didn't have any volunteers for the live interview feedback, but I have a couple questions. I'd love to hear if anyone is brave enough to do a practice interview with me. And don't worry, it won't be more than one question. And then I'll open up the space for us to have Q&A. Okay, let's talk about best practices to ace your interview. So I always like to think about prepping for an interview and sort of this before, during, and after phase. When you're thinking about when you've gotten a call from a recruiter, they set you up for an interview, I would say there's 4 really key things that you need to make sure are true for you, which is the first is really study the company or the organization you're interviewing for. I always say, people always ask, like, where should you start? And I would say at a minimum, I would say, look at their annual report. You can find so much about sort of the SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of an organization, how they earn revenue. I just typically find that it's a really interesting place to start, because it is the company themselves representing themselves publicly. The second one is, people always ask, like, how should you prepare for an actual interview? And I would say the worst thing you could do is script out exactly what you're going to say. The best thing that you can do is actually prepare examples or key bodies of work that you really can skim through during an interview to chat through live. And so I'll talk a little bit about what this looks like, but sometimes I go through some of the key projects that I've highlighted on my resume, and I'll just sort of put taglines around. This is a good example of how I navigated challenge. This is a great example of how I built relationships. This is a great example of how I collaborated. So that when somebody asks a question, or where the interviewer asks a question and they say, hey, can you tell me about a time when you had to navigate cross-functionally difficult stakeholders? I can sort of skim through my examples and pick one that fits for that example. And so I always say the best way to prepare is to just create a list of the examples and bodies of work that you've done, and sort of the taglines that you think it helps you best showcase what skills. The third one is study your interviewers. Most people are on LinkedIn. Most professionals are on LinkedIn. So typically, if your recruiter shares with you who you're going to interview with, you would just do a quick LinkedIn search on them to figure out a little bit more about their background. I typically like to make connections with people. If we went to a similar university, grew up in the same place, whatever, I like to try and tie that back so that the interviewer knows, like, I did my homework and I came prepared and I know a little bit about them. It also helps you do this fourth piece, which is really preparing questions to ask of your interviewers. And I'll really talk about why this is important. But if you interview and you have no questions at the end for your interviewer, I find that problematic. And I'll talk a little bit about why. But studying the company and studying your interviewer should give you at least 1 to 3 questions to ask them. So please make sure you have thoughtful questions based on who the interviewer is. And you're going to ask a very different question of the recruiter then you would ask of the hiring manager, then you would ask of the cross-functional partner to this role. So also tailor your question to the right audience. Sometimes I get questions as the HR business partner for my executives that's around like their business goals. And I'm like, that's a question you should ask the hiring manager, right? Because they would know it best. So those are some of the key tips on the before.
Can I ask a couple questions, Nami? Is that okay?
Please, go ahead.
Sure. So the annual reports, where do you how do you find annual reports for companies?
It's a very quick Google search, and most of their websites will have it in the contact us or about us section.
Okay. And then you talked a little bit about examples during interviews. Yeah, I guess, can you give what would be an example of something? For example, what would be an example? What would be a good example, and what would be a bad example to use as part of an interview?
Yeah, I would never say that there's a bad example, but I would think about it in terms of like, if you skim your own resume and you talked about different areas that you highlighted in terms of your impact. Yeah, I would flesh that out a little bit. And I'll talk to you a little about the STAR method, the situation, task, action, and result, and sort of flesh that out a little bit so that you have a starting point. I think oftentimes people are usually really nervous going into an interview. And I find that having examples from your impact story of your resume that is blown out a little bit that you can speak to just off the cuff because you're prepared with those talking points is what's important. You'll never really have a bad example, but I'll tell you about sort of the don'ts on what you don't want to highlight in those examples in a minute.
Okay, great. And then you said that it's really important for people to have questions at the end of the interview. What if you just had questions throughout the conversation that you're having with the interviewer? Is that okay, or does it always have to be at the end?
I would ask your interviewer that question. I typically set up all interviews at the beginning, and I'll sort of share, you know, I have 4 questions for you, and I promise to leave 7 minutes at the end for you to ask me any questions. So I'd ask that you hold any questions till the end. If your interviewer doesn't give you any sort of a steer or direction, I would say, as I have questions, are you comfortable with me asking them as we go, or would you prefer that I hold till the end? And that'll just help make sure that you make the best use of their time, but that you also don't distract from your interview.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, let's talk about during. It's one of the most important pieces. And I can't believe I have to say this, but make sure you're in a quiet place with limited distractions. I've had people take interviews in cars. I've had people take interviews at coffee shops. I don't know how that helps you, but it's very distracting for an interviewer. So I would just say, or sorry, for an interviewee. So I would say, please make sure that you're in a quiet place with limited distractions. And then I really want to talk about the STAR method when answering questions. This is also a really big hurdle that I see a lot of folks try to navigate through, which is either they tell too many details of an example, or they stay too high level that it's hard to understand the role that the person played in the challenge or the situation. And so this is like an industry best practice. It's not necessarily a Google specific thing, but we talk about the STAR method, which is when you think about how to answer a question about, tell me about a time, right? You always want to situate with, what was the situation? What were you asked to do? What was the task? What action did you take? And then what were the results? And that usually helps people, one, frame what they want to share with the interviewer, but then it also helps the interviewer segment out each one of these to know what questions they want to ask you in addition to this. So let me pause there. Nami, do you have any questions on that? Or does that make sense?
That's actually a really great tool that I never thought about before. So to me, I'm just kind of like, whoa, that's a really good way, I mean, to put it, really.
Yeah. And I also, you know, it's so funny. A lot of people talk about the STAR method. I also really like the CAR method, which is context, action, results. I think it's just an easier way of thinking about it, but people people forget to talk about the task. Like, what were you tasked to do? Mm-hmm. So either way, CAR, STAR, just really segmenting out the answer will really help the interviewer tell the story about your impact and what you're able to do.
Why is impact so important?
Because the context, if you think about the context of the interview, right, is like, I was impressed enough by your resume and curious enough about your leadership and your either transferable skills or your direct skills to the job to want to understand a little bit more about you one-on-one. And so your interview is an opportunity for you to like give sort of that meat and color to what I read in your resume. And so like, you know, the 3 sub bullets under the task, the job that you put on your resume, you're essentially trying to help make that come to life and show me, you know, what you're really capable of in your skills. And how you tell that story is so important, which is why I say like preparation is everything to nailing an interview.
We have a question from an anonymous attendee. When asked to share your experience and provide a deeper dive into your resume, what's your recommendation in terms of how much detail to get into?
We'll go through this through the live feedback, but I would say it's like you almost sort of need to read, like you almost okay, so here's the best way to do it is if you actually asked yourself the question that if you asked the question of yourself and recorded yourself listening to that story and you had no context to the company, to the role, and you heard yourself back, like, would it make sense to you the role that Nami played in this challenge or in this situation and what she was tasked to do? And I would say, this is why I say, I know people are really nervous to ever do like mock interviews, and I used to hate them myself for a really long time. But I would say this is why practice really helps, is like how you convey your impact is so important. And I can't underscore it enough, because some of the most talented people don't tell their story very well. And some of the least talented people tell a very great story because they've mastered the art of communicating, you know, what they believe they've done. And oftentimes that doesn't actually translate when they start. And so that's why I always say, gosh, confidence and telling your story is really important.
Rosina had a question. She said, could we send the connection requests on LinkedIn to hiring managers or recruiters before the interview? How do you write the connection invite letter? How to write the connection invitation letter is better.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I don't actually friend them, or what is it called, professionally network with them on LinkedIn. I just peruse their actual profile. Some people are blocked, but I find most people on LinkedIn are public enough that you can see some of the core things. So I don't actually request them as a friend or as a partner to network with until after I've landed the job.
And how long do you recommend your responses be when answering using the star or CAR method?
If you've been talking for more than 2 minutes, you need to read the room. And I always say, like, read your interviewer's face. Like, is their face glossing over? Are they having a hard time keeping up with the pace of your communication? And it's okay to pause. Like, I always pause and say, did that answer your question? Is there additional information that would be helpful? Let me pause there and make sure that you caught up with your notes. So like, there is a way for you to stop and check in if you feel unsure, but never talk for more than like 2 to 3 minutes. I often find I have to cut people off and redirect the question because the self-awareness isn't there.
That's a good response. That's all we have for Spark right now.
And I would always say it's always easier for me to ask more questions of you than it is for me to try and stop you. So I would, if you had to pick and you weren't sure, I would go with less than more and let them guide where they want to take their additional questioning.
That's a really good point.
Okay, let's talk about after. I find this really archaic, but it doesn't matter. Sending thank you notes to your interviewers is really important. Typically, I do that on LinkedIn. Other times, recruiters will take my thank you notes. I'll write the thank you note to the recruiter and ask them to forward it along. But I would always say, like, keep it really simple. I had one person actually, I guess, take notes during their own interview, and they recap my question and recap their answer. And it was the longest email. And I found that very strange. And almost read a little desperate. So I would just say, like, be really clear and concrete, right? Thank them for your time, restate your qualifications, literally in 1 to 2 sentences, sharing your enthusiasm for the role. And if they have any additional questions, to feel free to reach out. And then last but not least, like if you do not get the role, always ask for feedback. The recruiter, sometimes recruiters won't give you very concrete feedback, and other times they'll give you, I think, really helpful steers about how you can continue to, what they heard from other interviewers, or how you can continue to strengthen how you show up. So all is not lost when you don't get a role. The whole point is that you're just learning and continuously improving.
Any questions about that before we go on? Going once, twice. Okay, we can go on.
Okay, let's talk about do's and don'ts. Okay, these are some of my, some of them are just pet peeves, but I always say, really make sure you listen and answer the question fully, but be succinct. And I always say, if the question didn't make sense to you, it's always okay to say, can you repeat that question? Can you clarify what you are looking for? But never answer a question that you don't totally answer, that you don't totally understand, because that's usually when I find that people ramble. And then you just wasted a lot of time in your own interview. So really make sure that you're very clear about the question that's being asked and that you answer it fully. And if you really pay attention to like what the question is, you can almost sort of suss out what skill or competency they're trying to get at. So I'll give you a good example. If I ask Naomi, like, tell me about a time where you worked across multiple difficult stakeholders to get to an end outcome. Like what I'm trying to get at is, like, can she work across functional teams, many functional teams that likely have competing priorities, and be successful? And so I want her to tell me about a story that she's done that. So if you really get to the crux of the question, you get exactly what they're getting at, then answer that question completely. I always say, set aside time to fully prepare. I've seen a lot of people wing interviews. If you're good at interviews, then I can see why this is really easy for you. If interviews make you feel nervous, spend the time to prepare. It really doesn't make a marked difference.
There's two questions. Let me just ask you. So one person asked, when telling the resume story, do you suggest starting from your current role and working backwards, or starting from the beginning and end with your current role?
Either way, I specifically, I asked Naomi for me to do my own introduction for my bio, because that's exactly how I tell it when people ask me, tell me a little bit about yourself. It's high level enough, but it's like high level enough to understand what are all the different roles she's done and why did she do them. And then it's concrete enough to understand why I've made so many different industry moves and role moves. And that's what I just wanted to do, is help connect the dots for them. So it doesn't really matter if you do that ascending or descending, as long as you connect the dots.
And then Robel has a question. He said, what is the best way to answer the tell me about yourself question?
Well, I would say this is like, I like for it to be some mix of like personal and professional, but like I would stay high level, right? I would say, like, if you asked me that question, I would say, this is a great question. And I would always start with personal, right? So I would talk a little bit about, I grew up in Colorado. That's actually where I'm sitting now. Went to University of Denver, graduated with a degree in finance, started my career in consulting. Really enjoyed these aspects of it, didn't enjoy these pieces of it, decided to gravitate closer to what I enjoyed. Like literally how I teed up my team, tell me about myself, my introduction is exactly how I would do it. And if you notice, it didn't take more than 3 minutes for me to do it.
So nothing about like your favorite food, or that you're a promoter on the side on weekends?
No, I wouldn't. But I mean, I started with like where I'm based, right? Because that's like a hot topic nowadays, right? It's like, where are you? How did the pandemic, switch up your life? So I did a little bit of personal, but I don't really go deeper than that unless I get asked or unless it comes up naturally.
And then Ariam had a question. She said, how and when should you ask for feedback from the recruiter? A few days after the interview, or only if you know you didn't get the position?
I think a great recruiter is basically an advocate of yours through the process. And so I would ask for feedback at every juncture of the interview. So after every interview that I actually do, I say, how did that go? Is there any feedback for me, even if I got a call to do another one, or if he or she is telling me that I didn't get the role. So I usually like to ask it more immediately, because that is usually when you're top of mind for them. If you wait too long, I mean, recruiters are usually slammed with multiple requisitions, and they've likely moved on or are not going to give you that helpful feedback, because you're far from them at that point.
Yeah, you're far from the mind. And then somebody said, I mean, I think you kind of answered this, but in terms of pausing, I mean, I don't think it needs to be like an awkward pause, like for 10, 1 minute, but like how much time is a good time for a pause?
While you're talking about while you're answering questions. Well, this goes into one of my don'ts, and I'm going to talk about this in a second.
Okay,
But pauses are so good. I mean, any interviewer is taking notes furiously through the process. And so you pausing gives them a chance to catch up. And I would also say there's a lot of power in pausing, that people get really nervous about silence. But I think if you carry the silence with confidence, you'll usually be fine, and it actually helps the interviewer. But what you don't want to do is use a lot of like, it's still something I'm working on. Actually, I got feedback from my first manager at Google that I use the word like a lot. And when I actually recorded myself a few times presenting, I realized I only said like when I was nervous. And so I stopped. I just paused when I wanted to say like, and it served me well.
Wow. Okay. That's a really good, and that just helped you stop saying like?
It did, because I realized how often I was saying it. And one of the things she said to me was, it takes away from your message. You're saying really important things, but then you say like to string it all together, and it distracts from your message. And I recorded myself listen during 2 presentations doing it, and I totally understood what she meant after I listened to myself. I was horrified, and I hate listening to myself on any recording. So I get it, but silence is not a terrible thing. I'd rather pause than using as likes. Okay. I say this is like, do bring all of the confidence, take a really deep breath, and really remember what you're made of. I think interviews tend to make us all nervous generally, because we really want the job, or we really want the opportunity. But I think if you release yourself from the expectations of what's to come, you can just show up as yourself. And I would say, even the least qualified people that come with a ton of confidence tend to do really well in interviews than people that really doubt themselves through the process. So whatever that means for you around how you prepare the morning of, what you say to yourself, who you talk to, like really make sure that you pump yourself up, because confidence and the energy that comes from confidence plays a pretty important role in the experience that an interviewer has with you. And then last but not least, do ask about next steps. I know sometimes recruiters and companies are kind of strange about what are all of the formal steps in the process, and you don't know how far in you are or how many more steps. You should always feel really comfortable asking, great, what are the next steps? When will you get back to me? Thank you so much. And being able to sort of help yourself see the long game.
Okay. How much of your personality should you show? I tend to interview like Bugs Bunny, which is probably not the best. But like, how much of your personality should you show during an interview?
I say a lot of your personality.
Yeah, because I think a part of the whole process in an interview is somebody's trying to see like, can I work with this person for 40 hours a week, right? On some level,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. And listen, this is a huge topic in industry right now, which is companies have typically always thought about this idea of culture fit. And now it's this question of like, well, can we stop assessing people from this vantage point of, do I really want to work with Nami? Because typically you only want to work with people that are like you. And there's so much inherent bias in that. So how do we actually think about what's the culture add? Like, what do I get from hiring Nami? How is that different than what I have currently on my team or within my organization? And so if you have some of the best interviewers, they'll actually think about you as an ad, as opposed to how do you fit into the mold. And I always say, you don't want the role that you can't show up as yourself. So feel free to be 100% yourself, and it should feel like a fun experience.
Thank you.
Okay. Don't never be late. I think people just hold things against folks when they are late. So always be on the line early. Always make sure you test the connection first, but always make sure that you're on time and that you're not late. I wanted to talk about this, which is never speak poorly about your current employer, your previous employers, or colleagues. So a question I like to ask a lot, which is, tell me about a time when you had to work with a difficult colleague. If you answer that question and you shade them the whole time, I have a high probability that you're going to do the same thing with people that you don't enjoy working with in this context. There's a politically thoughtful way of answering that question about here's how I had to work with this person. Here's how our motivations weren't aligned. Here's how I navigated, the challenge with them. And here's what I learned, on the back end. And it's just a more professionally mature way of saying they were really difficult, but here's how I navigated it. But don't ever speak poorly about your employers or colleagues. It doesn't help you, even when you're going to a competitor.
Now, let me ask though about that. Like, let's just say somebody says, hey, why are you leaving your current position? Or you've been, terminated or something like that. How would you, in that, like, let's just say somebody's leaving a current position. Well, I just currently left a job and I hated them. That's gonna go on YouTube.
Let's cut that out.
That's true. And I left, and it was because, I had certain challenges in that position. Like, how do you communicate that?
Listen, I had the same thing. I would answer that question. So if you ask me, why did you leave your former employer? My answer for you would be, I spent 8 years really building and scaling their compensation program that led to the benefits program, that led to the total rewards program. And having been there for 8 years, I had really just ran out of ideas and fresh perspective. And I felt like it was probably time for me to take a step away, do something different, but honed in on the things that I really enjoyed about the job. So kind of like what I'm saying is, it was my time to go.
Yeah, I see.
Without saying I didn't enjoy working with anybody. I was over it and I was exhausted and not rewarded. I feel all those things, but I wouldn't say those things.
Yeah. Veronica had a question. Any specific recommendations for interviewing in a virtual environment?
Believe it or not, it is really important that you actually show up professionally dressed. This is, I don't know. I think maybe because people are at home, I'll see like people with like tank tops on, and I don't know. I find it a little, I don't know, a little professionally immature. So I would say like still dress the part, even if it's top up, that's all I see. Make sure you're not in an environment that's disruptive, that you have a strong internet connection. But other than that, no different than if you were in person. And I think one of the hardest things to do is to convey your personality virtually, but I would definitely try a little bit harder to make sure that showed through, either through your energy, your excitement, questions that you ask of them at the end, connections that you make to your interviewers. But there are ways to do that in a thoughtful way. Okay, I already talked about not using filler words. Also, don't use abbreviations. They're company-specific jargon. There's just some stuff that I'll never understand if I'm not in that field, even if I support that field. And just like your resume, in the same way that you wouldn't use abbreviations, do the same thing live when you're communicating your impact or what you were navigating. And then last but not least, don't fabricate any part of your experience. That matters. And typically if I ask an additional couple of questions to understand, the context of the story, the problem or the challenge that they were going through, I can usually kind of tell, that's interesting, or that didn't sound too believable, but okay, we're just going to keep going. And that's not ever the feeling you want your interviewer to have. So make sure you tell stories that actually feel truly applicable to your experience. Okay, shall I go to the next slide? I would love to do some live interviewing. And you know what? Maybe I should actually pause and ask this question and have folks chime in on chat. What's an interview question that you've gotten that you thought was really difficult or didn't know how to answer? and you'd love to hear an example of how to do that, or questions, or just generally questions that you'd love to know how to frame, chat it in. And I put some.
People don't use these questions for right now.
Yeah. Well, I put some that I thought are some of the ones that I like to use and that I've gotten asked myself, but would love to hear what other people ask or have been asked.
Yeah, feel free to use the chat. One of the ones that I've had in the past, and yeah. I kind of worked out like an answer, and I guess you can tell me if this is smart or the right way to do it. Is what is your weakness?
Yep, Veronica just
Veronica, there you go. Yeah, so I get that. I the way that I answer that, somebody told me once to say, tell them chocolate is your weakness or something like that, and then answer it with something that you're actually working on, which I thought was, so like, I might say, oh, my weakness is chocolate. Actually, I'm working on becoming more patient or something like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I always say, like, what do you think the interviewer is trying to learn? So maybe let me just say, if I'm asking you what you believe your greatest areas of opportunity or your weaknesses are, it's because I'm trying to suss out how self-aware you are.
Ooh.
And what you're doing to work on those things. And so telling me that your weakness is chocolate would make me feel like you weren't taking it. Like, I might laugh. Yeah, I might laugh for a second, but then I'd still be waiting for your real answer. Mm-hmm. And everybody has areas of development. So some people feel like if they say what their real areas of development are, they're not going to get the job. And listen, that is true. Let me explain to you. If I'm interviewing for an administrative assistant role, and I tell you my growth area is juggling multiple responsibilities, I'm likely not going to get the job. Right. So I would say, like, be thoughtful. And then I would ask you why you're even interviewing for that job, but be thoughtful about what you share, but you should always be very clear about what your areas of development are and what you're actually doing to address it.
That's great. Adiam asked, when you're experienced enough to get the interview, but during the interview they ask you if you have experience that with a particular software or writing specific type of document and you don't, how do you address that?
Yep, I would be very honest and say, actually, no, I don't have experience with that software, but let me tell you about how I learned or taught myself X software that got you the interview. Because I think what you then want to demonstrate is transparency in that you don't have that experience or that skill set, but how you've taught yourself a software skill on your own, or what you went through to help teach yourself that, like what classes you took. That's really important.
Any other questions?
Veronica.
Say they're perfectionists as a weakness. That is actually what I did on multiple occasions. I said I was perfect, and I don't have any weaknesses.
You know what I would ask? You know what I would say if you said you're a perfectionist? I would say, how do you think that holds you back from having impact? Because being a perfectionist is almost like a personality trait. Like, we all have sort of our own unique personality traits and quirks. But what I want to know is, like, do you see how it holds you back in the work context? And then what do you do to actively address it? Right. So somebody has once told me, I've gotten that answer before, and someone once told me, and I thought it was really thoughtful and actually ended up being really true on my experience working with them. But it was, I don't really know how to sometimes, like, be good with 80-20, right? And submitting something at 80% great. I want to take it all the way to 100%. But then stakeholders and people are waiting on me for this, like, finely tuned deck or presentation, when really 80% of that deck would have gotten me to the finish line. And I just kept working on it. And I thought that was really helpful because I felt like she understood how it held her back from having impact. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, well, what are you doing to address it? And I thought she gave a really great answer. But I will always ask you more about how that plays out than for you to be able to give me a blanket answer that I'm not sure what that means to you.
Veronica, I hope that answers your question. And then Lily asked, how do you handle stress, is another question I think that has come up in the past. So what's a good response for that question?
Oh, this is a great question. I was like, how do I personally handle stress, or the question itself? I would say that question is also a question around your own self-awareness. So I think any interviewer would really want to understand, like, what makes you stressed? How would I know that you're stressed? How do you get support when you're stressed? Basically how you manage it, right? And again, it's like, this is another quirk that people have. And the question is how self-aware are you to know how to manage it?
I don't get stressed is not a good answer, right?
No, I'd be like, are you human?
Okay. And then someone also asked in the Q&A, how to deal with the situation when you don't know how to answer a question. So let's just say you're asked a question, but you don't know how to answer that question. What should you do?
Well, I guess the question for me then is like, do you not have a great example? Do you not understand the question? Because it kind of depends, right? If you don't understand the question, I would say, I would just ask, like, can you reframe that question? I'm really having a hard time understanding what you mean by that, which is totally fair. Like, any interviewer should be able to ask their question in a different way to get at whatever they want to surface. If it's that you don't have experience or an answer for that question, then I tell you that you probably didn't prepare well. And the reality is again, I go back to these silences. I always say up front at the beginning of all my interviews, I say, I'm going to ask these questions, or I have 3 to 4 questions to ask you. I want you to take your time to answer the question. So if you need to have a pause to have a think, no need to let me know. Just feel free to do it, and dive in whenever you're ready. And so if you need a minute to come up with an answer, just pause and signal it if you don't feel comfortable with pausing, right? And say, let me have a think on that question and start writing. That's the other thing I should have put on my dues, is always have pen and paper, like old school pen and paper, to start to jot down some of your thoughts. But it's always okay to pause and have a think, but you should have an answer.
That's great. And then Veronica asked, I guess another question that comes up during interviews is, how do you handle change?
This is a great question. And the crux of what somebody's trying to learn there is, how agile are you and how much do you need to be in a structured environment versus an environment that is constantly changing? And so what I'm trying to get at when I ask that question is, what's your agility like? And are you going to thrive in this environment? And typically, if I ask that question, my environment's probably changing constantly.
And then Haben asked, give an example of a time where you dealt with conflict and how did you resolve it?
I love this question. It's one of my favorite questions. So I'll ask it in 2 different contexts. One will always be how you dealt with people that were difficult and that was a conflict, or where you dealt with a work or a business challenge that was conflicting and how you resolved it. And I'm usually trying to get at one of 2 aims, like, can you navigate through conflicting business priorities to get to an end outcome? Like, how can you get people on board, how you build followership, how you work through different perspectives. And then the former question is really around how you manage personalities, how you build rapport, how you build relationships. But I love that question, because people are just trying to understand how you deal with challenge and controversy. And so I would go back to the STAR method, right? And say, hopefully I would have my list of examples, and I would talk about the situation, the context, to help somebody be framed up in what was so challenging about that conflict. I would talk about the task that I was asked to do, and I was asked to, build a new people strategy. And then here's how I did it. So the action, and then at the end, here's what resulted from that. And like, the bonus is always, if you can do the reflection question at the end, which is, in hindsight, when I think about that project, here's what I would have done differently, or here's what I learned through that process. That shows just how self-aware you are. And I always find that to be sort of the bonus of the STAR methodology.
I think that that is all the questions we have so far.
Okay. Who is going to be my live guinea pig? Who wants to practice an interview question?
John volunteered, which is great.
Yes.
So we can pop him over. Do you want to do the break now, or do you want to?
Let's do one. Let's do John, and then let's take a 10-minute break, and let's see if that gives anybody else the courage to be a guinea pig.
Okay. Yay, John. I hope you're ready to be popped over here.
John. You might be frozen.
Hey.
Hi.
I surprisingly just got very nervous.
Oh, no, you have interviewed so much. I know you're good at this. But okay, John, tell me the question that makes you maybe the most nervous, or that you feel, I don't know, it's like a hard one for you to answer. And then maybe we can go through that one.
I think I would say maybe the weakness one will be one that will be.
Yeah. Okay. Let's me and you do. I'm going to ask you the question, and I want us to pretend like we're in an interview, and I'd love to hear your answer. And then for everybody that's following along, if you were at our last session, I want live feedback. So I want you all to say what you think John did really well and what you would have told him to do differently in hindsight. So I want everyone to be paying attention, because you guys are going to go first and giving him feedback. Okay, John, we're going to role play, but thank you so much for being here, John. And I'm going to ask you two questions, actually, because I want to hear both of them. So what would you say, what would your colleagues or former managers say is your greatest work strength, professional strength?
I think one of my strengths is connecting folks across different teams. And when I'm in a work environment, go around and I like to meet everyone and kind of know what they're doing. So I kind of have an in on what different teams are doing throughout the company. And I'm very good at saying, hey, you should maybe talk to this person or connect with this person throughout different projects. So I think that that's one of the strengths that people would say about me.
Yep. So you're a connector. I love that. I'm a connector as well, or that's how I would say it's one of my biggest strengths. Okay. So if you thought about the flip side and feedback that you've gotten in your professional career, what would you say is your greatest area of opportunity?
I think doubting that my opinion will be heard sometimes. And then sometimes it takes me a while to actually voice my opinion, or I would have to really process it in my head. And I think that one of the things that I would like to, that I'm working on right now, is the possibility of just really expressing what is happening in the moment as it arises, or to express that I either need a pause, or a time to process, and maybe give a deadline of when that would happen.
Yeah. And out of curiosity, do you feel like part of your hesitation in sharing your opinion is sort of how to land with people, or what holds you back from sharing your perspective, if you have one?
I think it's more of a trusting that my opinion matters, which I guess in a certain point will be, especially something that I noticed in the very beginning of a job, is just making sure that my opinion, like, it's important for me to feel confidence, but there's times where I think I need to ask. I'm messing this up.
Oh no, that's okay. We can break. That's great, because you know what I took away from that was, if I'm going to hire you, John, that I really need to make sure as a manager that I'm affirming you so that you feel confident enough to share your opinion, which I think that's a very valid and fair area of opportunity for anyone. But the fact that you had the recognition to be able to name what holds you back was also really powerful. Like, that was a very vulnerable answer and a real one.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
Because you just mentioned something that reminded me of the language of love, and I'm wondering if there's something to that with the language of work, almost, that I could bring into to the interview, because I feel like if I phrase it that way, I might be a little bit more prepared.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's pause, because I'd love to hear from people that are here. What do you all think that John did really well? Drop it in the chat. And what do you think he could have done differently?
So I thought I really like you. I actually really liked your response to the weakness question or the opportunity question. I like the phrasing of that, but I really thought you did a really good job of picking something that was actually I don't know, not typical. So I thought that was a really good response and really well thought out. So I'll start by saying that. He had his first answer ready to go. Robel said that. Great example of a weakness. That's feedback from Veronica. Tigis said that you sound very confident. Haben articulated his response really well, but too much and ums. And so that's one thing that could be lifted up as a weakness. I don't know. Nami, do you have any additional feedback for him?
No, and Haben, you actually named this, like his and ums actually fed right into his area of opportunity. It was like a confidence thing, right? So I actually thought it was par for the course and made me really clear about how I would, support him if he was on my team. So I actually really appreciated this time and space. And I think, John, my feedback for you would be you nailed your strength. I mean, being a connector. I think my build for you is that you can talk about how that's led to impact for you, because I've seen you actually do this in the work context. Is your ability to make all these connections has actually helped you be more effective in your former roles. And so I would play that up. And then on the flip side, there was just such vulnerability in you sharing that, because it's also a very human area of opportunity. And then you, outside of the uhs and ums, I think you could have totally shared what you're doing to sort of work on that, or what you need most from your manager in order to continue to feel supported in that.
Yeah. I mean, John, I think you just made a really good point though, which is like, I think as people of color, there is this idea of like an imposter syndrome that everybody kind of feels like they don't belong in a certain place, or yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that? I mean, how do you go about like working through that barrier in a way?
Working through the actual area of opportunity being, I mean, I think it's just a little bit about building the muscle, but I think that there's a role that your managers and colleagues would need to play in order for you to feel affirmed. And so I would have said, I sometimes am really worried about sharing my opinion because I'm not sure how it's going to land or if it's welcome. And so oftentimes I really need my colleagues or my manager to affirm me or to turn to me and say, John, would love to hear your opinion. And that usually invites and helps me speak up. And that's just a really clear way of being like, oh yeah, like this feels like a very natural thing. And I know exactly what to do to help support him.
That's great. And then Herman said, good responses. He's very personable. I think he was referencing words of affirmation as the love language. Area of improvement, use a lot of filler words, which we talked about. Veronica asked, do you think there are weaknesses or areas of improvements that people should shy away from sharing, even if it's true?
I think any areas of improvement that you believe are core to being successful in that job, I would not give voice to.
Well, thank you very much, John. And so do you want to do like a quick 5-minute break? And then if we have other volunteers, see, that was pretty easy breezy, beautiful cover girl, right, John? Like that wasn't too bad, right?
No, that was great.
Yeah, so other people should feel free to volunteer, but thank you so much, John, and we'll pop you back over to the attendees list.
Yep.
And then we will take a quick bio break for 5 minutes. Is that okay?
Yep, perfect.
There you go.
I'll be back in 5.
we will be resuming in another minute. All right, so we're still looking for volunteers for the Q&A portion, like for the interview practice piece. It really is, yeah. So if there are any volunteers, oh, somebody raised their hand, thank God. Sorry.
Totally fine. We can also go to Q&A too. I know it's really nerve-wracking to answer questions from people that you don't know.
Michael has raised his hand. I'm just gonna pop him over and see what happens.
Okay.
Hi, Michael.
Hey, y'all.
How are you?
1 second here.
Sure, no worries. Wow, your room is really clean.
Naomi. You didn't mean that. It is though.
Amazing. That's great.
That's what's also distracting. Is like sometimes people will take interviews in their rooms, which are also their offices, and it makes total sense.
Yeah.
But then their room is like a mess, and it's so distracting as an interviewer because aren't we all evaluating the background?
So once Michael's ready, we will pose the question to him, and then everybody can offer feedback just like we did for John in the chat. If there's any other brave souls like Michael and John, please raise your hands and we will be more than happy to pop you right. Oh, we have another brave soul. This Tigist, yes, we'll get Tigist next. Thank you guys.
Okay, Michael, tell me what feels like the hardest question you've been asked, or the question that feels, or you can even do an easy one, but I'd love to hear which question you'd like to practice answering.
Probably the weakness of 1, 2.
Yeah. Oh, that's a family favorite here. Okay. All right. So nobody will ask you that question outright without asking your strength. So I'm going to go with the strength first, then I'll get to the area of opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like for me, I am a very analytical person. So I'm a very structure-based individual. So I'm really good at building systems. But I'm also I'm an ambivert. So I'm good with people as well. So I think I have that strength that I'm able to build systems, but also connect with people very well. So
awesome. Okay, so then on the flip side, if I were to talk to your former colleagues or managers, what would they say is your greatest area of opportunity or weakness that you're working on?
I would say that in building systems, sometimes I might overanalyze things, so I don't move as quickly as I should. I think that's probably the biggest thing that they would say, maybe decisiveness and making a decision very quickly. But yeah, that I think would be the biggest opportunity of growth there.
Yeah. When you think about how you've tried to address it, like, what do you think about, or how have you tried to sort of work on that?
Just getting uncomfortable with, like, because when I'm in certain environments that I'm comfortable with, it's easier to do things. So just kind of getting out of my comfort zone and just getting accustomed to that, I think will be the best bet for me to be able to make decisive decisions. So.
Okay, one last question for you. If I was your manager, how could I help you with this?
Probably the best way is just always following up, maybe doing like a progress report, just maybe tracking opportunities where maybe I didn't do something very well or did something well. And that way we can kind of work together and see, okay, this is where you need to improve. Let's work together and making this efficient as possible.
Super helpful. Okay, that was awesome. I felt like you were really clear. Let's, folks on the line, love to hear, you know, what did we think Michael did really well? And what would you tell him to do differently next time?
So I think what you did really well is you have a really good presence. I think you come off extremely confident, which is great. The one thing I would say is that I think it would be good to talk about tracking methods that you've set up for yourself to help like keep you on task. Like, I think it's one thing to ask, you know, maybe your supervisor to hold you accountable, but I also think like systems that you like talking about systems that you've implemented in place that help you hold yourself accountable. I think I think that would be useful to add to the answer. I don't know if others have thoughts, but Adiam said short and huh?
Oh, so like, so you pretty much just said, make sure that instead of somebody else, what systems I have in place for myself?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so like if, for example, I have a tool that like, you know, I have an Excel doc that I track cases on, right? Like, and that's the way that I make sure that I stay on task and make sure that I'm accomplishing things and following up as needed. So whatever system that you have in place that helps you do that, just to show that you're also proactively addressing the issue yourself, like that you've taken steps and it's not just solely on your manager. So IDM said short and clear answers, sounds confident, answered the question that was asked, could provide a bit more detail. John said, I like that you were succinct with your response. I like that you went straight to the point. Veronica said he's confident and clear when addressing the question, didn't ramble. Adana said, clearly stated his strengths and weaknesses. He also came up with a possible solution that could help the weakness, which is really good. And then Robo said, like the clarity, maybe an example or two. Nami, I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add.
No, the entire group already gave great feedback. I think the things I thought you did really well is that you're very clear and succinct. You didn't spend a ton of time rambling. In your first answer, you actually, or sorry, in your second answer, you actually said, I am very analytical and I can stay like stuck in the cog until I need to make a decision. And so it sometimes means I spend more time on things than I need to. So you actually explained to me the so what, meaning like, this is my hang up, here's how it plays out in the work context. And here's how I'm aware of it. And I thought that was a really strong connection to tell me like, well, if I was your manager, how would I know when you're in analysis paralysis? And that's why I asked you the question. So as a manager, what can I do to help you? And I think that Naomi's feedback's helpful. So you always want to start with, what are you doing to be more self-aware on it? And then how can I supplement the work that you're already doing to work on it? But I thought you gave really direct answers and that was important.
Yeah, and oh, sorry, go ahead, Michael.
I have a quick question. If you've like, because I take a lot of time to kind of figure out my strengths and kind of what I'm good at, but maybe like during an interview, like if you've taken like assessments, like DISC assessments, stuff like that, would that be something you would show in an interview? or kind of talk about, like, oh, these are kind of, I took this assessment, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses? Would that be something to be good to show in an interview, or kind of just talk about?
Yeah, I like those. I mean, you're talking about like Myers-Briggs and that kind of stuff. Yeah. I like those. I mean, I'm in HR, right? So I do people work, and I love that stuff. I do that stuff all the time with my leaders. But I think it shows that like you actually have a sense check from, some other third party or some personality framework that's like really helped you reflect on who you are, what kind of leader you are, what you do well and what you don't do well. And so that only tells me like you're probably taking it seriously enough to be doing some of that groundwork. And so it couldn't hurt at all. But I would also say on the flip side, you don't really need that to know what you don't do well, and what you do well.
Yeah. Veronica added that you didn't really address how working on taking steps to make decisions. So I guess the part of it where it's like you kind of get bogged down in the analysis piece, like how do you break through it? Well, I guess that's a question. How do you finally get out of the analysis stages and to the working?
The question towards me here, I thought I was mentioned it during like getting out of your comfort zone, because like I mentioned, sometimes you build these systems and you're kind of stuck in a routine. So kind of getting out of your comfort zone is a way to break out of those kind of systems, and then you kind of have to kind of work on a fly, if that makes sense. So kind of if you're always stuck in a certain routine of doing things, it just becomes very natural and very easy. So getting out of your comfort zone could be a way where you can become more decisive, and just if something comes up, you're able to respond quickly. But that's, for me, that was my answer.
Can you give me an example of that? Like, what would an example of you getting out of your comfort zone look like?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
It depends. I guess it depends on the work. It depends on the work environment, because maybe they have like a set routine that you're supposed to do, or it depends what job you're doing. But taking that initiative to step out and, I don't know, having difficult conversations or whatever the case. But for me, I guess it depends what the job entails. And then I can kind of give a better answer. Otherwise, I don't know. And on a personal sense, for me, I like to do things that I'm not comfortable doing. And then that's how I kind of get out of my comfort zone and my routine. But I guess it's dependent on what you are doing in that, if it's in terms of the job role. But yeah, that would be my answer.
I think one thing I would say is even to just say, like, sometimes I'll call, I'll walk up to a colleague and try to tease out, like, to try to get their perspective on it, right? To try to show that, like, you're collaborative, right? Like, I'm going to go and talk to people and, like, try to figure out a different way or a different perspective to a problem. I think is, like, something that you can add to your response as well. I mean, I don't know if you have any other additional feedback.
No, I agree. One thing I heard you say, Michael, was when I'm really familiar with the space, I tend to move more quickly than when I am less familiar. And so then my question would be for you is like, well, how do you help acclimate yourself to a space so that you can make decisions faster? And so I think that was actually like, you could have played that up a little bit. But I actually felt really clear why you did the analysis paralysis. And most people really want data-driven people anyway. So it's like an area of opportunity that you highlighted that I also thought was a positive at the same time.
That's great. And then Lily, just one more feedback, said, I like how he answered, he highlighted his strengths and in his weaknesses. So just affirming what Nami said. Thank you very much, Mike. That wasn't painful, right? Let everybody know so that somebody else comes in here too, okay? So
yeah, you guys trust me, it's good. If you guys come up, just do it.
Okay,
it's definitely worth it. I took the feedback and I appreciate you guys. So
thank you. We'll talk.
Thank you.
Tigist, are you ready? Because you're next. I hope she's ready. What? Oh, Tigist left. Tigist. Okay, sorry.
No, I see her.
Yeah, no, I see her too. My bad. Sorry, Tigist. Hi, Tigist.
Hello, thank you for this. I'm like, should I leave now?
No. Okay, Tiggis, tell us what's the hardest question for you to answer? What makes you nervous? So maybe we can practice that one.
Sure. Thank you for this, by the way. I was just like, oh, I guess I volunteered myself. I think so. I'm seeking like a project manager or similar, maybe product type of role. And so I think one of the questions is probably like something around planning.
Mm.
And I'm challenging myself in being specific, but anything around planning, or I guess I can even take like either a weakness or a strength specific to like project work.
Okay, this is a good one that I like, which is, okay, when you are balancing multiple projects, how do you keep yourself organized?
So in my recent role, when I was working on a project with the different partners that we had, there were many priorities, competing priorities, and so many stakeholders were involved. And during that time, what I did was in the beginning and end of my day, I would go ahead and update a spreadsheet, and then let stakeholders know in our Slack channel like what was coming up, and then allow them to, allow them ample time to like look at what's coming up and take a stab at whatever they wanted to take care of at the time. And then later in the day, I would give them a little follow up on a private message and just say, hey, like just wanted to check in. And that was really helpful. And so at the end of the project, we were able to meet deadlines. And I even got feedback that like it was really helpful that I was on top of it, and they felt like my follow-ups were helpful for the project. And so they never felt like, there was like an follow-ups that they needed to do or wasn't aware of where the status of the project was. If I was to do that a little differently, I would probably do like weekly updates instead of like daily, so that there's more awareness around, okay, like next week, this is what's coming up. Yeah.
Awesome. And can I ask one follow-up question, which is, if I was your manager and I gave you one more thing on this to-do list to do, and it just felt like it was not feasible and you just had way too many things to prioritize for that week, how would you go about communicating the competing priorities and the lack of feasibility for that project?
So in a situation where there are multiple priorities and deadlines that needs to be met, in the past, what I've done is I would list out my priorities and just do like a check-in with my manager and say like, here are my thoughts around these priorities. Can we have a moment to just like check in and see if I'm in the right place and headed in the right direction around how to like move forward.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. No more questions.
No, I was kind of like, I didn't do the STAR method.
No, but I actually thought you were really clear about saying I would wait until my check-in to talk about like the trade-offs. And I think that's exactly what you'd want somebody who's going to be a strong project manager to be able to do, is escalate when there is not capacity or what resources they would need to do to actually make it happen. Okay, let's hear from others though, folks. What would you all say? Feedback for Tickets. What did she do really well in answering that question? What do you think she could have done differently? Let's get folks.
Actually thought you did do a great job of using the STAR method and sharing your takeaways from the situation. So I thought that as well. I think what I would like wish that I had heard a little bit more is like more, I wrote it down actually. What was it that I wrote down? I think I would have wanted a little bit more, like maybe actually like more concrete examples. I think that would, like, I think you named like a general project, but I think like a more like specific instance or a specific situation where you could like kind of take us through a story of like how something worked out to your benefit, I think could be good. But others can add on too. And then Veronica
Thank you for that feedback.
Veronica also said, try to take a pause instead of fillers.
Noted. Thank you.
Others? You did a really good job, so it might not be a lot.
You really did. And you seemed really calm and relaxed and confident about how you do your work.
You have a good
Thank you.
good energy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everybody has good energy. I'm just saying, like, you showed up in a.
But doesn't that matter, right? Is like, you're like, gosh, this is a pleasant experience and I really enjoy this time with them. That's why I say like being confident and the energy that you bring into these spaces is so important.
Yes.
Great lighting.
Veronica said, great lighting. I don't know what you're doing, but it's great.
It's right above me.
Adam said, a very good, impressive experience, nice pace of speaking. Answers show reflection, self-reflection. And then she just said to just say, blessed, which we all do. FYI, it's very hard to think of pausing and fillers when you haven't had time to prepare. 100%, that's true, John. I think it's hard to do that. I mean, I'm doing it right now, so it's really difficult. Any other feedback for Tigist?
No, I thought you did a great job.
Yeah, thank you, Tigist. That was awesome. Great job. And thanks for volunteering. Was it that bad? Let everybody know that it wasn't that bad.
I think we're done with our volunteers. No one's gonna want to volunteer with us.
Oh, she can't hear us. Okay.
Oh, no. Okay, let's maybe we cut live feedback and we go to Q&A. Let's see what questions folks have about interviewing.
Adiam had one that, Adiam had one that we didn't answer earlier. So let me just scroll up. Any recommendations to help build someone's self-awareness and areas of self-improvement?
So I think there's formal and informal ways of doing this. If I went the formal route, I would say, if you've ever done a 360 review, if you've never done a 360 review and you've been in the job market for over 5 years, you should do one. I could totally tell you about how it changed my life, but 360-degree reviews are usually facilitated by third-party companies. You can find one online. And basically it asks you a set of questions for you to rate yourself, and then it asks you to send the form to people that you've worked with. And they basically give you like a rounded view of things that they think you did really well and things that they think you should continue to grow on. But I actually thought that report was one of the most instrumental things for my own leadership. So there's like the formal way. I also have done executive coaching, which I really believe in at some point, because I think you kind of need this like objective. It's almost like a, I don't want to call them your therapist, but like usually go to an executive coach when you have a very specific area of development that you want to work on, and they really help you crack that nut. On an informal way, I used to ask this question back in the day. I don't really do it anymore because I think it made people nervous, but I would ask people at the beginning of the conversation or the beginning of the interview to text the first 3 people that they really held in high regard, to ask them 3 adjectives to describe what they do well and 3 adjectives to describe what they could do better. And at the end of the interview, I would ask them like, what came back from the text messages. But like, you should just ask your friends, you should ask your colleagues, you should ask your teammates, like, what do you think I do really well? What do you think I could work on? It could just be a I like to call it a one up, one down. But I always like to say, get rounded perspective from people who have gotten a chance to work with you, and it doesn't have to be formal.
Thank you. What types of questions should you ask the recruiter?
So many questions. I mean, I'm always going to start with the compensation question, which is like, what's the salary range for this role? I like to ask the recruiter what the process is like, logistical questions around, how best do I prepare? What advice would you give me? Tell me a little bit about each of the interviewers. What's it like working at this company? Sort of like broad questions about the job, the process, or the company. And they usually will give you a really helpful steer, and that can usually help you drive what types of questions you might ask others.
Right. Another person asked, can you talk a little bit more about how you can describe some of your transferable skills in an interview if you're coming from a background that is not tech, but you're interviewing for a tech role, especially when giving examples and such that may not be in the tech field?
Yeah, well, I think everybody has transferable skills for most jobs. Like, you think about core things that people really want you to be great at, and it's like, I want somebody who's a self-starter and who will teach themselves when they don't know. I want somebody who is going to communicate early and often with me. I want somebody that knows how to navigate challenge and controversy and handle it in a professional, mature way. So like, I'd say that some of the most on the forefront companies are thinking about what people are qualified to do and skill set and capability. And that means you don't have to have the exact relevant experience. But I think if you don't have relevant experience, it behooves you to really understand the industry, the company. And this is why I say, like, read their annual report. If you don't know how Google makes money, I don't know how you're answering the question about why you want to work there, right? So there's just like core things that's like, you should show some acumen around, I really understand your context, even though I haven't worked there.
Great. Coco asked, do you recommend any company in particular for this 360 review? Happy to research otherwise.
I don't have a specific company, but I'll actually, I'll email out to this group what I used with my executive coach if it's helpful.
Okay, great. Comp before or after interview offers. So like, I think you mentioned earlier, Nami, that you were saying that to talk to the recruiter about the possible compensation. But sometimes, and we're gonna do a separate workshop to talk about how to talk about compensation. But just in general, if it does come up in an interview, what's the best way to handle it?
I mean, comp is a deal breaker for me. So I'm not really trying to interview for jobs that I wouldn't accept the compensation. So for me, when recruiters reach out, I always ask, like, what's the salary range for the role? And that's how I decide whether I'm even going to take the interview or the call. But I always say, like, learn it early, because you're either saving yourself and or the recruiter time if they're not within the range that you would accept an offer.
Great.
I wouldn't negotiate the offer though until after my interviews were like glowingly saying that they wanted to hire me, because that's really when you have leverage.
Great. And then, well, I just want to say one thing. First off, we have a survey, just like we did last time. Please fill out the survey, give us your feedback. There is a part 3 to this, which is going to be a career panel. We have a great group of folks that are going to be a part of that career panel next week in different industries. We have folks in Amazon, people working at Google, other people working at Google, someone from Netflix. So just be sure to join us next week. We are happy to take any more additional questions. Last call for alcohol. Nope, just kidding. Questions. Last call for questions. Will there be a recording for these calls? This one is being recorded. So once it's recorded, follow us on social media. We let you guys know when it's up on YouTube. Please fill out the survey. I will share the link one more time. Here it is. We really appreciate you guys. Thank you, Michael. Any other questions? Okay, so before we wrap, everybody just show some love to Nami in the chats right now. Just please light it up. She does an amazing job. You guys, we're a completely volunteer-run organization. Like nobody's paying her to be here. She's doing this just because she like cares about people and like thinks that more folks should be in tech. So I just want to really appreciate her and thank her very sincerely for her time and all her effort. And I really appreciate it. I think we all do. If there are no more questions, we really hope to see you guys next week. It's going to be a really great and awesome panel, and Nami will be back. So, and I guess I will too, but just by association. With that said, thank you very much. You guys have a great rest of your Thursday. Thank you.